and this is done on behalf of the College of Education. Amy Heil is our distinguished alum for the College of Education. She is a graduate of New Mexico State University, and the reason that we thought that this was important, especially for new students, is so that you can see all the different types of career opportunities there are and how our alums have navigated through their lives and opportunities to build a wonderful and amazing career. So a lot of you have her bio that we handed out, but just a couple of things I just wanted to highlight for Amy. First of all, let's give her a really big welcome. Amy comes to us from the Phoenix area. She still has family in Las Cruces. She is a forensic interviewer with Phoenix Children's Hospital. She has had an amazing career, and she's going to take you through that and talk about her work. But we are proud to call her our alum. At this point in her life, what she is most proud of is giving children a voice and a safe space to be able to share some of the experience that they've encountered. And for that, we're most grateful as a community. And so with that, I would just like to welcome Amy Heil and let her get started on her career path and where she is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Callie, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for coming. Turn this on. I have a head cold, so I want to apologize in advance if I sound foggy, because I feel kind of foggy, but that's no different than any other day, so that's okay. I appreciate you all coming to this tonight, and it's truly my honor to come back to New Mexico State and talk to people. I consider it a responsibility of mine to educate as many people as possible about my career, my path to this point in my life. Especially students as you're going through college. I know when I first started college, and even when I finished college, I did not know what I was going to do, and that's continued to evolve up until today, and will probably continue to evolve in the future. But I have been able to use my education, my training, my experiences to kind of mold into this current profession. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, I have bachelor's degrees in criminal justice and psychology that I got from New Mexico State in 1996. And then I went to work at the district attorney's office here in Las Cruces. And I started out literally in the basement of the district attorney's office. When I first graduated, there weren't any positions available for somebody with bachelor's degrees, so I just said, just let me in wherever I can. And so I started off as a file clerk, just like digging through old files and tossing out duplicated forms and whatever. I eventually moved my way into the DWI unit, where I was a secretary there for about a year. And then I moved into the juvenile crime unit, and I did that for about a year. And during that year in the juvenile crime unit was when I first got introduced to forensic interviewing. I was helping run a program in that unit for first-time, low-risk juvenile offenders to kind of get them through the court system quickly and get them the services that they needed, so that the system could kind of focus on the kiddos that needed more help and more services. And during that time period was when I started watching the forensic interviews for the prosecutors that came in from law enforcement. And so I would sit there, I would watch them, I would take notes as to what the child was saying during the interview, and then I would give those notes to the prosecutors, and they would determine whether somebody could be charged with a crime or not, or whatever needed to be done. I found it really fascinating. I had never heard of forensic interviewing before. I had no idea what it was. And so then I got a position with the victim services unit, and I was a victim advocate there for about 5 years. And I handled all of the crimes against children cases, as well as other violent crimes like murders or drive-by shootings or whatever. Then I was kind of burnt out on the criminal justice system and needed a break. And so I thought, well, what could I do? Child victims were my passion at this point. I was invested in this, I loved doing it, but I needed a break from seeing the court system every day, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So that's when I applied for graduate school, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? How can I still work with kids but not be in the criminal justice system? And school psychology seemed like a really good combination of that, still being able to work with kids, but in a school setting. So that's when I went to graduate school here, and did the school psych program, the EDS school psych program. While I was in that program, my research project was school-based response to child sexual abuse. So I conducted a training for teachers on identifying possible victims of sexual abuse, and then what do you do, how do you respond if you have a child who comes to you and says something is happening to them, or you're seeing behaviors or signs that something may be happening to somebody. So that was my research project, and I graduated in 2008 with my EDS degree. I worked in the schools here in Las Cruces for 2 years, and then I moved to Phoenix and worked in the schools there for 3.5 years. During the time period that I was in the schools, I loved it. I continued to focus on children who'd been victims and had trauma histories and had emotional disabilities and behavior disorders, mostly, many times, because of a trauma base at some point in their lives. But I started to get the itch to get back into the criminal justice system, and I thought, okay, how could I, again, kind of combine everything that I loved doing? So I started looking for forensic interview jobs. Found out that they do not come by very often at all. They are few and far between. But I mean, I just feel like everything in my life has just kind of come into line when it was supposed to. And so this position opened up at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and I applied. I was hounding the HR person at the hospital, like, please, you know, did you get my application? Have you talked? Have you set up interviews? Like, I was sending her emails all the time, like, please, I need to talk to somebody. And so I got it, and so I've been there for 3.5 years. And I work on the child protection team. And so what our team is comprised of myself and one other forensic interviewer. And then we have board-certified forensic pediatrician and forensic nurse practitioners who provide the medical exams on the kiddos that we see. And then we have social workers who are based at the hospital so that when kids come into the emergency department, they can kind of help start the ball rolling from the hospital point of view for services. But I am not housed at the hospital. I work off-site at an advocacy center. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with advocacy centers, but it's considered to be the best practice for child abuse investigations, are to do everything at an advocacy center. It's kind of a one-stop shop for child abuse investigation. So it houses multiple agencies that are all involved in that process. So in my center, we have Phoenix Police Department's Crimes Against Children unit, which are about 45 detectives. We have myself and my child protection team members. We have a unit of child protective services. We have mental health therapists who provide counseling for kids as their cases either going through the court system or after the court system's over. And so we provide a place where kids can come and everything happens all in one place. So when a kid comes in, it's very child friendly. There's playrooms, we have therapy dogs, we have therapy horse, we have, it's very child-centered, but it's neutral as well. And so a forensic interview is always the first step in an investigation. So when a report gets made, either through a police department or through child welfare like CPS, elements of a crime. It's not a counseling session. It's very, very structured. And I'm going to go over the components of that in a minute. But I just kind of wanted to give you guys an overview of where I'm at this point. So forensic interviews. Like I said, it's approached from a neutral perspective. I am a neutral fact finder. It's an investigative tool that's used to look for the elements of a crime. We're trying to get as many facts as possible so that after I'm done with that kid, the detective can go out and look for evidence that either corroborates what that child has said or exonerates it, because somebody's being accused of a crime and we need to make sure that if something happened, it's the right person. And it's used in either a legal or a medical setting. So we work for, like I said, the detectives who are doing the criminal investigations, the CPS workers who are doing their investigations, family court. We get court orders sometimes from judges to do forensic interviews on kids if there's high conflict custody disputes going on and allegations are being reported of abuse or neglect, or even civil court matters as well. I am not a truth detector, and that is one of the major misconceptions of forensic interviews. And when I have to do defense attorney interviews, that's one of the first things that they always ask me is, well, did you feel like this kid was telling you the truth? Do you feel like this kid was really abused? I'm not there to make that determination. That's for a jury, if it gets to that, to make that determination. I'm just there to get as much information as possible so that somebody else can make that decision later on down the road. Forensic. What does forensic mean? We rely very heavily on research. There is a huge body of research that has exploded in the last 30 years due to all of the media accounts involving child abuse cases and the popularity and the more awareness of it that's gone on in our communities. So we have to stay up to date on the research and be able to discuss it and practice it. And so it's based on research in child memory, child development, linguistics, eyewitness ability, and suggestibility. Forensic interviews should always be done by somebody who has had specific training in forensic interviewing. So even with my background and working in the DA's office, working as a school psychologist, I was not ready to be a forensic interviewer when I got hired. I had to go through specific training to learn how to do that. The detectives also go through the same training that we do, because obviously I can't interview every child. So the detectives do it as well. And that's why it's so important that in your communities, wherever you live, that you have an established protocol for child abuse investigations. I know Doña County has one. I know I was part of the development of that back when I worked at the DA's office. Maricopa County, where I live in Phoenix, we have a very specific protocol for child abuse investigation. Any child 7 years of age and under has to be interviewed by somebody like me, who's a dedicated forensic interviewer. That's all we do. If the child is over 7 years old, the detective, if they've gone through the training, can do the interviews. But if it's a child over 7 who has any kind of disabilities or developmental delays, if it's a case of chronic abuse where it's gone on for a really long time, if it's a reluctant kid who's just going to be difficult to talk to, or if it's a case of custody and there's possible coaching and things going on like that, then they should refer them to us as well. But it's important that that's all established so that every agency that you're working with knows what to do. Every forensic interview that I do is video and audio recorded. There's different reasons for that. First of all, we try to minimize how many times this child has to say what happened to them. First and foremost, my goal is to never re-traumatize a child that's already been traumatized. And so we try to minimize how many times they have to do that. Also, no one can say that they said something they didn't, that I put the words into their mouth, that I made them say it, that I introduced the information to them and they were just agreeing with me, whatever. Also, end result, if this is a criminal investigation, my interviews are evidence. So they go into the police files, they get disclosed to defense attorneys, they get shown in courtrooms, you know, all that stuff. So we need a record of everything. And then the use of the advocacy centers or child-friendly interview rooms. I know there's some jurisdictions, especially more rural jurisdictions, who just don't have that type of advocacy center model. They have small police departments who are just trying to do the best they can when these cases come in, and so they do their interviews at the police department. It's not the best way to do it, but if that's the area that you're living in, try to make that interview room as child-friendly as possible. Make sure your detectives aren't going in with their guns and their badges on, or uniforms, and just try to make it as friendly as possible for those kids. So setting the stage before we even go into an interview. Like I said, we try to minimize the interviewers. So even when a report gets made, between the time that a police report gets made and by the time that child comes in to see me, we try to get them in as soon as possible, but just depending on the situation, sometimes that just does not happen right away. And so a lot of times the kids that I see have already been questioned multiple times by multiple people, by family members, by friends, by CPS workers who come in, by counselors, anybody. And so we try to educate people and make sure that they don't do that. Interviewer status, bias, and demeanor. What I mean by that is, like I said, making sure that if you're a cop, you're not going in with your uniform and badge and gun on. Making sure you're not introducing yourself as a cop or a CPS worker or somebody like that. All I do is say, I'm Amy and I just talk to boys and girls all the time, you know? So that's it. You don't want to be an authority figure because a lot of times these kids have been told that cops are bad. CPS is bad. If you tell, I'm going to jail. If you tell, I'm going to kill your dog. If you tell, you won't be able to pay your bills and we're going to get kicked out of the house. So you want to minimize your presence. The age of the child and developmental functioning of the child, those kind of go hand in hand. It's really important to assess that before you go into an interview as much as possible. There's some, I mean, I interview kids as little as 2.5, but it just kind of depends on their ability level and their language abilities. You're not going to get as much information, but you'd be amazed at how much information a 2-year-old can tell you about something that's happened to them or what they see happening to somebody. Primary language, and this was really important, and this specifically ties into my school psych background because my program here at NMSU for school psych was very focused on cultural competence and multiculturalism. And that has proven to be so incredibly useful to me. I use it every day in my job. I educate others in it every day because we get kids who the patrol officer goes out on the scene to get the report and they say, oh, it's a 4-year-old. Oh my God, yeah, she's talking English all the time. Yeah, no problem, no problem. So they bring the kid in and I start talking to them and their primary language is Spanish. Asking a kid how old you are, what is your name, you know, are you hungry, something like that is very different than a forensic interview. And so we know through language acquisition that those skills don't take place until they start getting into school and get that experience with a secondary language. So if you have a 4 or a 5-year-old who somebody is swearing up and down, speaks English, it's important to assess that and always have a bilingual interviewer on hand. Because especially in times of trauma, people revert back to their primary language. Or the conversations that are taking place with the adults around may be in a different language. So it's important to make sure that you're aware of that and prepare for that. different forensic interview protocols throughout the nation. This is a list of all of them. The one that we use and the one that is most supported in the research as being the most accurate and effective and get you the best information is the first one, that NICHD protocol, or it's also called the semi-structured cognitive interview protocol. What this one does is it focuses on free recall memory. So what I'm doing is asking the child to tell me a narrative from beginning to end. Tell me what happened, and letting that child go. And there's different phases of that interview. So the first phase is the rapport building phase, but it's also practicing that narrative with the child. So what I do is say, tell me some things you like to do for fun. They rattle off some stuff, or tell them how, when's your birthday? Oh, it was, May 4th. Tell me everything that you did for your birthday from the beginning to the end. And that is building rapport, but it's also allowing me to assess that child's language abilities and see if they're even capable of being able to tell me something from beginning to end. Or am I going to have to adjust my questions to shorter questions in order to meet that kid's abilities? And then we go over some guidelines and the promise to tell the truth. And I'll go over those more in a second. And then we go through the allegations. And again, it's, tell me why you came to see me today. Tell me I heard something happened to you. Start from the beginning and tell me everything that happened all the way until the end. Of course, you're going to get gaps in that, and so I have to go back and fill in the holes. But a defense attorney cannot criticize an interview if I didn't talk. If the child is doing all the talking and I'm just sitting there listening, then they can't say that I influenced that kid or made them say something. So those are truly the best interviews, where I just sit there. And then a neutral closer. So we always try to end with talking about, what TV shows do you like, or what are you going to do when you leave here today, that kind of thing, just to kind of wrap it up. So like I said, the rapport building language sample is incredibly important. It's been found to improve the length and the amount of reliable information during a forensic interview. So it's incredibly important to get that neutral topic. It kind of triggers their brain to be like, oh, okay, this is how it's going to go. She's going to tell me to tell her about something, and I'm just going to kind of go with it. The guidelines. And I don't call them guidelines when I'm in a forensic interview. Like I could say them in my sleep at this point, because I literally say, and I probably do, like I say them the exact same way every single time with every single child, so that when I get into a courtroom and a defense attorney is cross-examining me and asking me, how did you conduct your interview? I can say, I do it the same way every single time. And it's not like, well, why didn't you do it this way this time and you did it this way for another time? You have to remain consistent. So the purpose of the guidelines is to make sure that the child knows that in that room, they are the experts. I am there just to listen to them and hear what they want to tell me. And that's abnormal for children, right? Like, they're used to being around adults who are telling them what to do, telling them when they can talk and when they can't talk, and, all that kind of stuff. And so it's unusual for them to be like, this grown-up, like, just wants me to talk about myself? Like, that's weird, But that's what it's about. I don't know what happened to them. They're the authority in that room. It's all about them. And so we go over a few things. The first one is not understanding a question. So I say, you know what? I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes I ask questions that don't make sense. And I really want you to let me know if I ask you a question that doesn't make sense, so that I can think of a better way to ask that question. It's leveling the playing field, letting them know it's okay to tell me if I am saying something odd that they don't understand. Not knowing an answer to a question. This is hard for kids, right? Because they're used to being in school and teachers being like, what's the answer? Calling on them in class and being like, they're like, 62 you know, or whatever. So you're telling them, like, you know what, if I ask you a question and you don't know the answer or you don't remember, that's okay. I don't want you to guess. Just tell me that you don't know or don't remember, it's fine. Again, leveling that playing field. Correcting me. So I say, you know what, if I get something wrong, if I make a mistake and say something wrong or repeat something back that I think I heard you say and I get it wrong, please tell me, because I really want to make sure I hear everything right that you tell me. Again, letting them know, you know, a lot of times kids don't feel like they can correct an adult if they do something wrong. And repeated questions. And that's just because, honestly, sometimes I forget that I already asked the question. So I say, you know, I get a little forgetful. I may ask you the same question more than one time. I'm sorry, it doesn't mean that you gave me the wrong answer. It just means that I forgot I already asked that question. And then that it's important that we only talk about things that really happened, or if they're a witness to a crime, things that you saw with your own eyes or things that you heard with your own ears. So again, we're wanting them to make sure that they are talking about what happened to them, not what somebody has told them happened to them, or not about the conversations that they've heard other people having. Will you promise to tell me the truth? And that's all. That's the only question that I ask them about that. The research shows that children take promises incredibly seriously, and it will give you the most accurate information if you ask them to promise to tell you the truth. Now, in the old days, and I think probably in some of the other protocols that people still use elsewhere, they did the truth versus the lie thing. You know, if I say that I'm wearing a green sweater right now, is that a truth or a lie? If I say that I'm wearing a purple sweater right now, is that a truth or a lie? You're asking the child to call you out on being a liar. The research has shown that's not effective. It makes children incredibly uncomfortable, and the promise works way better. Another really great thing that does when you ask them to promise to tell you the truth, sometimes you get a no. And then that can kind of open a new path for me to take to say, well, what would make it hard to tell me the truth about something? Are you worried about something? And that's where you can get a lot of really useful information for an investigation. Well, yeah, because, you know, Mom told me that if I tell, we're going to lose my house. Or, you know, Grandpa told me that if I tell, he's going to go to jail. That those types of threats or coercion can come out. And so that's really important to know. Because first of all, if Mom knows that this child is being abused and is allowing it to continue, now she's in trouble for not protecting her child. So that promise is incredibly important. And then we go into the allegations phase. So the first thing I say is, tell me why you came to talk to me today. That's always my first statement. Sometimes kids know why they're there. Sometimes kids don't know why they're there. Sometimes they know why they're there, but they pretend like they don't know why they're there. And they'll still say, I don't know, you know. But we always start out with that. And then if we're not getting anywhere with tell me why you came to talk to me today, then I can use some cues from information that's known already in the investigation, like through the police report or the information that I've already gathered from the investigator. So I can say, I heard that something may have happened to you. I heard somebody may have done something to you that wasn't right. I heard you had to go to the hospital the other day. I heard the police had to come to your house the other night. You know, sometimes I talk to boys and girls if somebody has bothered them. Sometimes I talk to boys and girls if somebody has hurt them. Sometimes I talk to boys and girls if somebody did some touching that wasn't right. And so you kind of start out broad and narrow it down. But again, I'm not giving them too much information because truly I need the specifics to come from them as much as possible. And then if they start talking about it, just let them go. Just let them go and just keep encouraging them to keep going. And then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. And let them just take you through the entire story. And they'll tell you when it's over. They'll be like, and that's it. You know, or and then we came here. Or whatever. And so you'll know when they're done. But do not interrupt them. Let them go. Sometimes it's hard if you get a really challenging chatty kid, they can go for a long time, and you just have to sit there going, God, please let me remember everything that they're saying. But you can always play the dumb adult too and be like, you know what, you told me a lot of things and I don't want to make any mistakes, so I'm going to ask you some questions just to make sure that I heard everything right. And so you can have them go back over it again, but just never interrupt them, never interrupt their flow. They're ready to talk about something that is horrific, something that a child should have never gone through, and if they're ready to talk about it, who am I to interrupt them? Let them go. And so that pre-recall memory, that narrative, is the most accurate, but you get those errors of omission, because when we tell a story, any of us, even as adults, we're not going to tell every single event in a sequential order, and a child isn't going to know what elements I need for a crime, and so they're just going to tell me what happened. So then we have to go back and fill in the holes. So one thing that we see a lot of times in forensic interviews is what we call script memory. This occurs during chronic abuse, something that's occurred for a long amount of time. We all have script memory. It's a general pattern of memory. It's how we get through our life on a day-to-day basis and navigate our world. So it's how you drive to and from work or school every day. It's how you go through the grocery store. It's, you know, just the things that you do just kind of on autopilot every single day, which is fine, except when we're talking about cases of abuse. We can't use script memory when we're talking about cases of abuse because end result is possible charges. So we need to be able to tease out as many specific incidents as possible so that we can determine what has happened to this child. And when a child goes through a traumatic event like that, their brain does not store those memories the way we normally do, and things don't get encoded into that long-term memory, and so it ends up being script memory. And so in a forensic interview, when a child starts saying some certain words, I have to keep my ears open for that when they say, he comes into my room, and sometimes it hurts, and he always locks the door, or, you know, something like that. Or he's using things in the present. They're using things in the present tense, like he uses the belt. Anything like that that clues me in that this has happened more than one time, I have to ask that kid, did this happen one time or more than one time? And some kids say, no, it happens all the time, it happens every day, it's happened 14,000 times, and you'll get all kinds of different answers. Doesn't really matter. It just makes me know that it's happened more than once, and so I have to start going through each individual incident and start triggering those memory banks, that filing cabinet in that brain to kind of tease out the different incidents. And the way we do that is by asking some specific things. So first thing we always ask is, tell me about the last time that it happened, because that's obviously going to be the most fresh in the kid's memory. And again, tell me about the last time that it happened. Start from the beginning and tell me everything that happened that last time all the way until the end. We go through all of that, get the entire incident. Tell me about the first time that it happened. All of it. Tell me about the time you remember the most, or the worst time. A lot of times when you ask a child to describe the worst time, or the time that they remember the most, they'll tell you they know, and it's usually because it's something different that happened. It's usually either involves an act of violence. If we're talking about sexual abuse, it could be an act of violence, or it could be something to do with penetration or something like that. There's always some tidbit of information that kind of, they go, oh, that was the worst. And I say, well, tell me how come that one makes it the worst? Or how come you think that one's the worst? And they'll tell you, you know. One way that we really use, that works really well for kids to get them to anchor into those specific episodes is location. Location is a great way to anchor somebody into something. So, and I always listen to what they said. happened in your room? Did it ever happen in a different room? Or did it ever happen somewhere else besides at your house? Or a different house than you live in now? Using location helps trigger them. Sometimes we say, was there ever a time that somebody saw it happening or almost walked in and you had to stop it real fast? Yeah, you know, and so you just try some different things to try to get as many different incidents as possible that child can remember. So, like I said, we're looking for the elements of a crime. Where, obviously, location is important, and description of the crime scene. There's different reasons for that. First of all, jurisdiction. You know, if they lived in different states, in different counties, in different cities, it's important to know where those were. And then also if there's a search warrant that needs to be drawn up so that they can go look for evidence that may still be at that location. It's important to get that information. Who? Obviously, we want to know who did this to them. You know, and they'll say, it was dark, the lights were off. We have kids who are at parties with tons of adults, and they don't know who did something to them. They were sleeping in a bedroom, and somebody came in and did something. I have to try to get as much information as possible about the person who may have done something to them. We get the kids who get snatched off the sidewalks, and you know, literally into the white van with no windows, you know, like you hear about on the TV. But it does happen, and so we have to try to get those identifying information so that they can try to, if it's somebody who snatched a kid off a sidewalk and let them go, patrol needs to be out there looking for this van, looking for this person, you know, whatever. Potential witnesses, tell me everybody who was there when this happened, and other victims. It is not uncommon for children to report that abuse occurs in front of other people. And that's a huge misconception that people have when I have to testify in court. It's something that jurors always ask me about. How can it happen if it's in a room full of people? We get parents who bring their kids in and say, I just don't understand how this could have happened. I never leave him alone with her. You know, there's that misconception that that the kids get taken into a closet or into a room where nobody can see. Perpetrators do these things in front of other people all the time. And the reasons why are, it normalizes the behavior. The kids think, oh, well, everybody is seeing what's going on. It must be okay. Nobody's telling him to stop. Everybody knows what he's doing. So it normalizes the behavior. It can also be used to help recruit other victims. If there's other kids in the room who are watching, oh, how come Susie gets to have the special attention from Uncle Joe? How come I don't get it? You know, that kind of thing. And sexual offenders will report that it actually helps increase their sexual stimulation. So it's important to know who else was there, because those are people that need to be talked to. What? Obviously, we need to know the acts that occurred. How is really, really important, especially for children, when we're asking them to describe really graphic acts that most children are not knowledgeable about. They don't even know those parts of the body. They don't know what they do with those parts of the body. They don't have the names for those parts of the body. But we're asking them to describe what happens to those parts of the body in intimate detail. And so how we do that is by asking those how questions. We need to know if it was on top of clothes, if it was under clothes. We need to know, we can't ask if it went inside, because the kid's not going to know what that means. So we ask, how did it feel? How did your pee-pee feel? Tell me everything he was saying. Show me what his hand was doing. All of those sensory questions, what could you smell? What could you feel? What could you see? Are so incredibly important. And in a courtroom, when they say those types of things, I had a kid one time that said, it felt like 2 boulders were going inside me. I mean, how much more graphic is that? I guess you don't want to play that in front of a jury. if you're a defense attorney. So, and when. We need to know when this may have happened because there may be medical evidence that needs to be collected, or just exams to see for the health of the child, to see what happened. And that's the most difficult one for kids. Kids have a really hard time with time frame. It's asking them when something happened is not effective because you're going to 9 times out of 10 get false information, especially if they're under 10. And so you have to use different strategies to try to get that information. So we'll ask them, what grade were you in when it happened? What school were you going to when it happened? What house were you living in when that happened? Or who were you living with? And then one thing is younger siblings. Where was your little brother when that happened? Oh, he wasn't born yet. Or, oh, he was still in mommy's tummy. That gives me a time frame. And so that's how we try to establish that with the younger kids. And then, like I said, the free recall is great, but we still have to go in and clarify and ask those more focused or direct questions. We try to minimize using yes/no questions or questions with multiple choice answers because a child is going to just agree with you a lot of times or answer the last option that you gave them. So we try to avoid that. If we do have to use it, we always follow it up with an open-ended question. And we avoid any kind of leading or suggestive or questions to bribe or coerce the kid, obviously. Sometimes we do have to use questions that are leading, and what that means is introducing information into an interview that a child hasn't already said. Try to avoid that as much as possible, but sometimes you just have to do it. The most common one that we have to use is the pornography question. Most times kids do not bring up pornography being shown to them on their own. We have to do it ourselves, but that's a separate charge. And in Arizona, at least, it's sometimes can be an even steeper penalty than any kind of hand-on contact. So I could say if somebody ever tries to get you to watch movies or look at pictures of people with no clothes on, and they say, yeah, tell me all about that. So again, I'm always following it up with that open-ended question so that the kids can tell me what happened. And then we kind of go into how the disclosure came about. How did someone find out about this? Try to just elicit from them, did they try to tell somebody before that somebody didn't believe them or told them they better shut up and never talk about it again or whatever. Just try to piece a gap together, who knows what. And then we have to explore alternatives because that's always the defense. How do we know it wasn't somebody else who did this to this kid? Maybe they're just trying to get back at mom or dad, whatever. So we always ask them, has somebody else ever done something to you, like what so-and-so did? Or have you ever seen so-and-so do something to somebody else? Maybe there's other victims out there that we need to know about. The exposure to pornography, coaching, or secondary gain. So that would be, you know, especially if we think there's a custody situation going on. What did mom say about family care? What did mom say about dad? What did dad say about mom? All of that information is important because, again, it just either helps corroborate what the kid is saying or helps exonerate it if it goes the other direction. And we always have to look at multiple forms of abuse because we know that the kids who have maltreatment oftentimes are getting multiple forms of maltreatment. They're at higher risk, and so we try to cover as many different areas as possible. If I get a kid who comes in for a physical abuse case because somebody beat them with an extension cord or burned them, I always ask about sexual abuse, especially strangulation cases. If you ever have a child that you come across who has been strangled, always, always think about if there may be sexual abuse going on because there's a high correlation between strangulation and sexual abuse. Neglect, so that can mean anything from parents doing drugs, being left at home alone, not being fed, dirty homes, any of that kind of stuff. And then the neutral general topic, like I said, just what are you going to do when you leave here, favorite movies, thank them for coming in and talking to me. And then you can ask the child if they have any questions for you, but I would caution you with that. And just kind of depending on the situation, because there are kids who say, is so-and-so going to jail? Am I going into foster care? Do I get to go home now? Am I ever going to see my mom again? And you may get some really tough questions that you're not prepared to answer, or that you can't answer because it's not your position to answer that. So I tend to avoid that unless I know pretty safely that it's okay if they want to ask me a question, but just be cautious about letting the kid interview you. And then one last thing is the blind expert witness testimony, and that's another component of my job as a forensic interviewer. So I go in and testify in criminal court trials or CPS trials where they're trying to sever a parent's rights as a blind expert. And this is a case that I know nothing about. I was not involved in the forensic interviews. I don't know what the allegations are. I don't know if there's one victim or 12 victims. I don't know if they're boys, if they're girls, if they're 4 years old, or if they're 14 years old. I know nothing about the case. I just go in there and am asked to talk about general characteristics of child sexual abuse, to educate the jury or the judge, whoever is making the final decision, on what we see, what the research says, what we see in the field regarding child sexual abuse. And these are the different areas that we focus on. So the disclosure, how disclosures come about, the reason for the delay in disclosures. People don't understand that kids don't tell right away. Why wouldn't he tell right away? I've always talked to him about touching. We know that about 85% of the kids who get sexually abused are sexually abused by either a close family member or a close family friend. These are people that they love. These are people that their families love. They have emotional attachments to these people. They're not going to tell. And so we go in and explain that because people get really confused about that. Memory, we talk about the memory components and the script memory and the episodic memory and what happens during trauma to the memory and all that kind of stuff. Suggestibility, how there's certain children, especially by age, who are more highly suggestible to getting false information. Recantation, when kids recant, why does that happen? False allegations, there's a lot of myths out there about false allegations as well, and that's always one of the first defenses that a defense attorney brings up is, how do we know they're not just trying to get back at somebody or something? Interviewing techniques, behavioral characteristics. Not every kid who's sexually abused shows any behavior characteristics or symptomology. Many of them are completely asymptomatic, you know what I mean. Show no symptoms. And we explain what that means and why. And then if they do show symptoms, what those symptoms are. But not necessarily that any one symptom or any cluster of symptoms can be used to diagnose that a child's been sexually abused. And the process of victimization is really important for people to understand as well. So that's another thing that I do. But again, just like with the forensic interviews, I'm not there to diagnose, and I'm not there to determine the child's credibility. So I can't go in and say, yeah, he was sexually abused. No, he wasn't sexually abused. I'm just there to tell you this is what we see in the field and help people better make a decision. This is my contact information. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about anything to do with my field, my background, any questions that anybody has. Please feel free to contact me. If you're ever in the Phoenix area and would like to come see my center, I'd be happy to give you a tour. Just any questions that anybody has, I'm happy to help.
Does anybody have questions for Amy today?
So, as a future social work practitioner, I always wonder, like, within our field and like helping others, what issues? Because I know you said the first step is, get an interview. So have you been in a situation where your own values and morals came in between your neutral ground that you're trying to, your neutral perspective that you're trying to take on an interview? And from that, like, did you ever have an ethical dilemma that you were put in?
No. The closest thing that I've had, I guess, regarding like a conflict of interest type thing, I guess kind of you would say, was that I had a child come in that I was supposed to interview, and I knew her from being a school psychologist, which was really, I mean, what are the odds of that in Phoenix with like, over 5 million people? But it happened, and I saw her name on my schedule, and I was like, I can't interview her, and so I gave it to a colleague. You just have to be cognizant of that. We all come in to any profession. I go into any interview room with my own belief system, my own worldview, my own experiences. You just have to be cognizant of that and acknowledge if it's a situation that you don't feel like you can be neutral in. It's just really important to be like, you know what, I don't think I can do this. There are definitely some cases that I have that affect me more than others. And sometimes I know why, sometimes I don't know why. But I have to be cognizant of that, and I have to be like, okay, can I do this? Can I set aside whatever is going on and do what I need to do for this child? Or do I need to give it to somebody else? So far, except for that one little girl, I haven't had to do that. I think I've developed whatever, I don't know if it's healthy or unhealthy, but some way to compartmentalize everything in my life. I guess you depend on who you ask in my life, if it's healthy or unhealthy. But also, I have the fortune of having a psychologist who comes in and works with me and my team. And she's a trauma-focused psychologist. She works with all the first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, all of us who work in child abuse investigations, prosecutors. And she comes in and works with us once a month as a group, and then we can also see her individually as well. And she does EMDR therapy with us, if anybody's familiar with that. It's a therapy that they use on victims, where you have a memory that's traumatic, and it's affecting your life in some way. Once you go through this therapy, you still have the memory. You don't want to erase the memory because that's important to keep, but it's not traumatic anymore. And so I'm really fortunate that my team and my community that I work with really advocates self-care and taking those mental health days. And if there is a situation where you're just like, I cannot do this today because I'm having a really bad day, having that flexibility to be able to do that. So I would encourage anybody who goes into this field to just recognize your own strengths and your own areas of challenge. Any other questions?
You mentioned that whenever you see a case where there's strangulation, you always ask about sexual assault. I'm wondering what's an example of the specific words that you might use to kind of ask for that.
So if I have a kid who's come in for a physical abuse case, no matter what it is, strangulation or something else, we go through the physical abuse allegation because that's what they're there for. That's the acute situation. And then once I've gotten all of that information, unless the kid is totally fatigued and just like ready to go, I'll say, sometimes I talk to boys and girls if somebody did something on the parts of their body that people aren't supposed to touch. And then I have them identify the parts of the body that people aren't supposed to touch. And you'd be surprised how many teenagers start to like squirm and wiggle and get super uncomfortable when you ask them to tell you the names of those. So they're worse than like the 5-year-old. But anyway, that's kind of how I introduce it. And sometimes you get, yeah, that's happened too. And depending on the situation, I will either go into it then, or I can say, okay, well, you know what, we've been talking for a really long time, and would you be willing to come back and talk to me again sometime about about some other things, and then just have them come back another day to talk about the other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go on the internet, you will find that something like 3/4 of all psychological research cannot be replicated. Okay. Now, your protocols are based on psychological research. I invite you to complete the syllogism.
So in my field, it would be unethical to recreate or do an experiment where we actually abuse kids and then see what happens. We can't do that. So all of our research is a compilation of studies that have been done in the past, that are reviews of cases, that are, a lot of it is children who've been in therapy or sex offenders who've been in therapy who talk about what's happened throughout their histories. So yeah, we cannot actually abuse a child and see what happens.
Any other questions for our guests? How many psychology majors do we have? How many CEP majors do we have? Criminal justice? Great. Well, can we have a big hand for Amy?